I would say the one you just mentioned, the payments one for me is the most beneficial because it's addressing a few issues that are very relevant to companies right now. First of all, like fraud, right? Fraud has been a hot topic, and rightly so, given the just the quantity of fraudulent activities that happen to companies today. TMSs are typically better for these fraud checks.
Welcome to Actualizing Success. In this podcast series, our in-house advisors discuss today's finance and technology topics with an emphasis on solutions that embrace tomorrow.
Hi, I'm Kerry, COO of Actualize Consulting, and today I am joined by Kyle, Senior Manager at Actualize. Today we will be talking about the best practices when transitioning to or upgrading your enterprise resource planning, ERP, and the importance of involving the Treasury group early on in the process. Welcome, Kyle. I know this has been a really big topic this year with many of our clients, the integration of the ERP and the Treasury Management System. So let's get started. Why do you think it's so important to integrate an ERP and a Treasury Management System?
Hey, Kerry. Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. And this is a very topical thing in the market right now. I've been on these types of projects for about 8 years now. What draws companies to this particular project is just getting the data in the right place for their business groups to operate daily on an efficient basis. So we here at Actualize, we're working a lot with treasury departments, AP, AR, accounting, and in that space, we oftentimes see this two-system landscape. One is the main ERP, which houses most of the financial operation of a company, and then we have the TMS, Treasury Management System, which specializes in treasury things. I've seen that the ERP providers aren't best in class for these treasury functions, which is why we need this TMS to fill the gap. We have this two-system landscape. It's really about integrating these two systems, getting the data where the business users need it.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard when you have two systems with different data and you have to integrate them together. What are some specific examples of the data passing between those two systems?
Traditionally, it was treasury transactions, whether it been like just treasury payments for cash management, or maybe there are debt and investment deals or FX hedges in the TMS. And then it was outbound GL entries like debits and credits to the ERP. So then the ERP has 100% of the accounting entries, which it needs ultimately, right? Mm-hmm. But now we're seeing more outbound traffic from the ERP, and that's doing a couple things. It's giving Treasury the data it needs, like for forecasting. I'm on a few projects now where we're getting AP, AR, SO, and PO data out from the ERP into the TMS. So that fulfills like short-term, medium-term, long-term horizon forecasting, and is really helpful. The other big one is payments. So ERPs have all the invoice information, and most of the time it has your vendor master data, so your beneficiaries. Getting that data out into a TMS, and TMSs are built with pre-formatted formats a lot of times that are already mapped to the bank's requirements. My clients now, when this sort of system is in place, we call it a payment factory. That is a big draw to using the TMS. We're utilizing pre-formats and getting those files out to the bank, and it kind of cuts down on the implementation time. So, and that also gives the short-term forecasts. So if you're getting all your AP data into your TMS, it's helpful for the AP team because it's automating and it's making the implementation more efficient, but it's also giving your treasury team forecast information. And then the third major one we see is market rates. So wherever companies get their rates, whether it be Bloomberg or Reuters or something else, there should be some kind of central repository, whether that be the TMS or ERP or a different kind of like just data lake. The hub and spoke model for this type of data is what we consider best practice. So aggregating your rates in one system and then sending it out to the different bits of technology in the company that need rates. So I'd say those three are the major ones we see.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, we just think about a large company and the amount of payments that they have. Being able to have that data where you can forecast would be very valuable to companies for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, which one of these do you find that provides most value to a company?
I would say the one you just mentioned, the payments one for me is the most beneficial because it's addressing a few issues that are very relevant to companies right now. First of all, like fraud, right? Fraud has been a hot topic, and rightly so, given the just the quantity of fraudulent activities that happen to companies today. TMSs are typically better for these fraud checks. We have built-in integrations with some of the TMS providers that we use, where it's easy to find anomalies in your payment operation. We can send it through sanction lists. We can send it through checks for vendor data validation. And if your TMS, if you have a TMS or you're shopping for a TMS, these types of checks are important to think about. But also, TMSs can manipulate data and send it out to a different vendor that can perform those checks as well. I find that ERPs are a bit more rigid in the data that they can get out in the formats. And TMSs provide a little more flexibility for the client. So that is a big one for payments, but also managing your connections all in one place. So the TMS is doing a lot of different business functions for a company, but also providing a technical solution as well for your system architects in your company. So if you can have one FTP or API from your ERP, so your TMS, wow, so many letters, sorry. But if you can have one centralized connection to the TMS and then manage all your different banking connections from the TMS, it's a bit more of an elegant design than having your ERP interface with different banks and then having your TMS interface with different banks, because then you could be just doubling the amount of connections that you would need to maintain as a company. So a big proponent of going with this TMS model, we call it payment factory again, is that you have all your connections centralized, and the TMS provider is going to maintain those FTP API connections going forward. So it takes burden off of your IT teams. I would also mention the increased visibility. So when you're bringing all of your payments into your TMS, Treasury and whomever else has access to the TMS now has this big data set that it can analyze. You now have visibility to your global payment operation. And with that comes a myriad of different benefits. Forecasting, like we said before, we can look at historical and extrapolate into the future. We can use it to just find anomalies, which can help with fraud. You can also implement better controls once you have all your payments in one place. So you can have one global process to have data come from your ERP into the TMS, out to your banks, and that brings a lot of standardization to your payment operation, as opposed to just having a more decentralized way to go. And then just to close out, this is all payment factory, by the way. So there's a lot of different benefits, and the last two small ones that I can think of are cost efficiency, right? So just economies of scale. If you're aggregating all of your payments into your TMS, you can choose which banks you want to send that volume to. So it might not make sense to send payments out of 6 banks now, because you have all data in one place, and you can send all those payments that were going to 6 banks out to just one, potentially. So just through economies of scale, you can save in some bank fees there. And then the last one is just scalability. So these payment factories are built so that when you do acquire a different company or your business process changes, you're able to be flexible and scale as your business adapts. So a lot of different benefits to these payment factories, but those are the main ones.
Well, that sounds pretty great. And imagine most companies would want to implement a payment factory if they had the budget and all the right people in place. What's the catch, though? Is there a downside to implementing something like you described?
Yeah, there's always something, right? So, after implementation, the downsides are pretty minimal. I would say whenever you're introducing multiple systems to a process, like I'm describing ERP to TMS out to the banks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would it be more simple just to go ERP to the bank? Yeah, it is more simple to do that. Like there's one less system and one less system to break, one less system to reject data. That should be kind of taken into account when making these decisions. Given all the benefits I just mentioned in the previous answer, I would say the benefits outweigh that negativism. But that's post go live is what I'm mentioning. Pre go live, I will say the other negative is just the time it takes to implement this system. It takes maybe a year, 3 years, depending on how complicated your payment landscape is. But I think at the onset of these projects, that is kind of shocking to a lot of clients, just about how long this takes.
Right. But you're also, depending upon how many banks that you're dealing with, you're dealing with outside parties as well. So it's not only internal resources, but external resources as well. So I guess it's really not a quick win type of project. So why does it take so much time?
There's a few different reasons. First is this solution is as good as your data is, just like any project. So oftentimes we have clients excited about a project like this, and they want to get going, they want to engage banks, they want to start testing, but we need to take a couple steps back before we can progress because their vendor master data has been dispersed over many systems, potentially housed in different ERPs or different bank portals. So step one is just aggregating that information and cleansing it to the requirements set forth by the bank. So that is not a fun task, and typically it could take quite a long time, depending on how large your operation is. The second issue I see is just scoping. So if we are coming from a more decentralized payment operation, now we're trying to implement an ERP with a TMS, and that's usually done with one group, like Treasury or AP. The controllers group is kind of heading this up, and bringing that local knowledge to that steering committee and the people that are making decisions about which banks to engage and what payments to test is an effort. So just scoping internally to understand your business landscape and getting a solid list of the scenarios that your implementation partners need to test can take considerable amount of time. But once we have that, we can get into finally the testing. Data in a better place. We have our scope defined, and the biggest time drain is testing. Just given how specific the data needs to be to transact a payment over Swift or Fed, Nacha, whatever the payment clearing system is, they have very specific requirements. And if you're not meeting them, they're going to fail. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you've been around payments, you know that they are finicky. So testing. This takes quite a long time. Many different cycles with, we're going from your ERP to the TMS to the bank's test environments, and we can have failures at any single one of those checkpoints. On the backside, they send us a file back. We call this an acknowledgement, call it a payment status report or PSR, and that's going to communicate the status of the payment. Did it execute? Did it reject? And if it rejected, what's the error? So that file on the way back also needs to be tested. So just the amount of data points and potential fail points are what usually extend the testing cycles longer than maybe other work streams.
Yeah, I mean, to my leading into this, multiple banks, but then you have all the testing and the coordination with all the banking partners. You know, it seems like this is it is more complex, like you said, than if you were doing a different module in a TMS or a different type of integration. Yeah, I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that and why it takes so much coordination and planning?
So as these different business functions are getting rolled out, companies are typically trying to do payments at the same time. And I feel like payments carry more complexity, more opportunity for failure, and we have to deal with the banks. So there's an extra party in the project. In my mind, kind of make payments a special case. So putting them on the same timeline as AR, accounting, payroll, for me it's typically a model that quickly gets updated, and our testing cycles for payments are typically extended past those other work streams, just given the extra complexities.
Right. So what can companies do better in these projects to give the payments work stream the respect it demands? And, I see from our team, when they are trying to integrate with ERP, how there are project delays. So how can we kind of set the project up for success?
First, it's just acknowledging that what I'm saying is true. So I've been on many of these projects, and very often, I would say 9 out of 10 of my projects becomes a special case. So those sitting on these steering committees, making the plans at the onset of these projects, engaging payment experts, such as myself, or if you have them internally, that's great as well. If you have someone that's been on projects like this before, they will tell you that payments takes a little extra time and specific exit criteria for the testing that is differentiated from the other work streams. Acknowledging payments are different, seeking help, then you can set realistic testing cycles and goals. Also involving Treasury early, because Treasury typically is owning the banking relationship, and getting these banking resources to align with your testing cycles is something that you want to get ahead of, because these projects are very popular and banks are strapped for resources to accommodate these. So the quicker you can get in line so that they can line up resources to facilitate your testing, the better. So engage Treasury early.
Well, that is very well said. I think that's all the time we have today, Kyle. I think you kind of wrapped it up for us, making sure that you give payments the energy, the time and the energy and the planning that they deserve, and engage Treasury as soon as possible. Anything else you'd like to share?
No, just thank you again, Kerry. Appreciate this platform and what you're doing here, and hopefully it was helpful for some people out there.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Actualizing Success. Make sure to visit us online at www.actualizeconsulting.com, where you can explore our service offerings. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or your preferred platform. If you've enjoyed what we talked about today, please consider leaving a review and following us on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or would like to share your opinions with us, please send us a note at podcast@actualizeconsulting.com. We look forward to hearing from you.